Imagine a place where tales of the missing aren't bedtime stories, but a daily reality. Deep in the swamps, people vanished for decades. Yet the truth turned out to be far darker than any legend. Fog can hide many truths. In the city, it drifts lightly across rooftops and disappears with the morning sun. But here, in the southern marshlands of the Mississippi Delta, fog becomes something else entirely. It clings to the ground like a living shroud, heavy and damp, moving in time with the slow breath of the earth itself. The people who were born here have a saying: when the fog breathes, the swamp remembers. The land itself feels endless, a drowned kingdom of black water and cypress groves. Spanish moss hangs from the branches like tattered banners of forgotten wars. Wooden shacks on stilts lean over the water, and rotting boardwalks vanish into reeds taller than a man. The soil is soft and treacherous, the air thick with the scent of decay, and the horizon is swallowed whole by gray mist. To outsiders, it is hostile. To locals, it is simply home. Yet even those hardened by the swamps know which places to avoid. Old hunters, men who lived and died with the rhythm of tides and seasons, refused to guide travelers past certain bends of the river. Fishermen swore they heard cries at night, echoing across the reeds. Sounds too human to be animals, too broken to be living. And in the villages scattered at the edges of the delta, mothers would whisper the same warning to their children. Don't wander too far. The swamp takes what it wants. For decades, people vanished here. At first livestock, then dogs, then, more quietly, more horribly, the wanderers and the lost. A traveling merchant who never returned home. A child who disappeared between house and school. A trapper whose boat was found adrift, but never his body. The authorities explained everything with neat phrases. Accidents, drowning, wild animals. But the signs never matched. A torn dress, a broken shoe, a doll's porcelain head staring up from the mud. Beasts do not leave trophies. And so, in the autumn of 1891, a man of science arrived from the city to put an end to what he called provincial superstition. Dr. Elias March was a physician, a man who believed in order, anatomy, and evidence. He came with a notebook and steady hands, certain that reason would cut through the fog. The sheriff who summoned him met him at the edge of town, a weather-beaten man whose eyes betrayed the unease that his words tried to conceal. That night, over a rough wooden table, the sheriff told Elias what had been found. Fishermen had pulled something from the swamp, something that should not have been there. Remains, stripped with a precision too exact for accident or decay. The sheriff's voice dropped lower as he spoke. This isn't drowning, doctor. These marks, they're made by human hands. Elias tried to dismiss it, to laugh it away as hysteria. But he did not. The description rang too clearly. His medical training had taught him the difference between accident and intention, and in the stillness of that room he understood. Somewhere out there, in the flooded silence of the delta, someone was hunting. Later, when the shutters creaked in the wind and the smell of wet earth seeped into his room, Elias lay awake, staring into the dark. The swamp seemed to whisper through the boards, its breath sliding cold across his skin. And in that whisper was a warning he would never forget. Do not seek us. You are not ready for the truth. The call came before dawn. A fisherman's boy had stumbled across something in the reeds, and the sheriff insisted Elias come with him. Lantern light bobbed across the riverbank as they rowed, each stroke of the oar sinking into black water that seemed to drink the sound. The fog had not lifted. It never truly lifted here. They reached a stretch of marsh where the reeds bent low, crushed by some weight. The boy refused to approach, crossing himself again and again before fleeing back toward the boat. Elias followed the sheriff, boots sinking into muck, until the smell struck him first. A stench both sweet and sour, the unmistakable perfume of death. At first he thought it might be an animal carcass, a deer lost in the swamp. But when the sheriff held up his lantern, the truth emerged in fragments. Pale bones rising out of mud, long and narrow, arranged in a way nature never intended. The flesh had been stripped with methodical precision. Tendons and joints showed the clean lines of steel, not the ragged tears of beasts. Nearby lay a small heap of objects. A child's shoe, the leather cracked and swollen with water. A ribbon, pink once but now stained brown. And in the mud, half buried, a porcelain doll with its head snapped clean off. Its blank eyes caught the lantern flame and seemed to stare back. Elias felt his stomach twist. He knelt beside the remains, fighting against the urge to recoil. His fingers traced the grooves in the bone, lines too straight, too practiced. He had seen the handiwork of butchers in the city. This was the same, not clumsy, not rushed. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident, Elias murmured. The sheriff nodded grimly. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Elias swallowed hard. A doctor's training demanded detachment, demanded he record rather than fear. But the swamp pressed in on him, and every instinct screamed otherwise. This was not the cruelty of nature. This was the cruelty of men, deliberate, systematic, and terrifyingly calm. As they searched the area, more fragments emerged. A cufflink, its silver dulled by mud. A strip of cloth, torn but still patterned with delicate stitching. And worst of all, a child's dress, the lace at its collar matted with dried blood. Elias forced himself to write notes, his handwriting jagged with tremors. Anatomical precision, intentional dismemberment, storage implied. The sheriff lowered his voice. You see now why I called you. Folks here, they talk about old families in the swamps. They whisper names, but no one dares speak too loud. Fear keeps them quiet. Names, old families. Elias's mind searched for reason, for logic. But reason faltered before the evidence in the mud. He closed his journal and looked back at the water, where the fog swirled thick as wool. Somewhere beyond, hidden in the silence, lived people who had done this. People who hunted, butchered, and kept trophies of the dead. On the boat ride back, Elias stared into the mist, and for the first time in his career, he wished he had not seen. The swamp whispered again, and this time he almost thought he heard words in the breath of the reeds. We keep what is ours. Elias did not sleep that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the pale arc of bone, the severed doll's head gleaming in the lantern light. By morning, he knew he needed answers, not in the swamp, but in the town's records. If such horrors had roots, those roots would leave traces in paper. The courthouse sat at the center of the settlement, a leaning brick building with shutters warped by humidity. Inside, dust floated in beams of pale light, and the air smelled of ink, mildew, and time. The clerk, a nervous man with spectacles cracked across one lens, brought Elias stacks of ledgers and parish registries. Be careful, sir, he whispered. Some things here are better left unread. Elias began to turn the pages. What he found was not a single story, but fragments scattered across centuries. Notes on missing travelers. Lists of property transfers where the same surname appeared again and again, tied to land deep inside the swamps. Baptismal records that abruptly stopped, as if whole branches of families had simply ceased to exist. The names surfaced repeatedly, scrawled in fading ink. LeClaire, sometimes spelled differently, sometimes shortened, but always returning, decade after decade. Farmers, trappers, midwives, a family older than the town itself, anchored in the marshlands where outsiders never lingered. One entry chilled him more than the rest. In a doctor's notebook from 1792, he found a description of a child brought to town. Eyes too large, teeth sharp and irregular, joints pronounced. Mother claims this is the family look. The physician had written no conclusion, only a warning. Avoid contact with the swamp kin. As Elias traced the timeline forward, a pattern formed. Disappearances followed the same rough geography, always along the edges of LeClaire land. In the 1830s, 3 loggers gone without a trace. In 1854, a schoolteacher lost on her way to the parish. Each report thin, each investigation brief, always ending with the same shrug, lost to the swamp. But Elias saw something more deliberate. He sketched the locations on a map, his hand trembling as the points began to form a shape. Not scattered, not random. A wide circle, enclosing a heart of untouched land at the swamp's center. A boundary, territory. When he showed the map to the sheriff, the man's face tightened. "You've drawn the old ground," he said. "Folks here don't speak of it, but we know. That's LeClaire country. Been there since before memory. No one goes in and no one comes out." Elias felt a weight settle in his chest. He had come to explain away superstition. Instead, he had uncovered the outline of something older, darker, and patient. A family that did not vanish with time, but endured, feeding off silence. The sheriff closed the map with a heavy hand. "If you're smart, doctor, you'll put those notes away. There are things this town survives by not asking." But Elias could not. He felt the pull of the swamp, stronger now, as if the land itself demanded witness. He knew then that he would not leave until he saw what lay inside the circle. 2 days after his visit to the archives, Elias stood at the river's edge with a small party assembled by the sheriff. They carried rifles, lanterns, and a kind of grim silence. The sheriff himself came, though Elias suspected it was duty more than courage that kept him there. Alongside them stood the Tizot brothers, guides who knew the marsh as if it were stitched into their blood. The brothers were gaunt men, their faces weathered like bark. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in a drawl low enough to be mistaken for the swamp's own murmur. One of them carried a bundle of charms carved from bone and strung on rawhide. When Elias asked, the man simply muttered, "Keeps them quiet." He did not say who them was. They left at dawn. At first the path was firm, a dirt road that wound through cypress groves and fields of tall reeds. But as the sun climbed, the ground softened, and the world narrowed into corridors of water and shadow. The air grew heavy with the stench of stagnant pools. Mosquitoes rose in black clouds, and every step forward felt like sinking deeper into some vast, waiting mouth. By midday they reached the first sandbar, a rare patch of dry ground. The brothers insisted they stop there, though Elias urged to press on. "Not wise," one said, eyes darting toward the trees. "They watch after dark." The party made camp, lighting fires that hissed and spat in the damp air. No one spoke much. Even the sheriff, usually blunt, kept his eyes on the flames as though afraid of what might stare back from the fog. That night Elias lay awake, wrapped in his coat, listening. The swamp was never truly silent. Frogs croaked, insects whined, unseen creatures splashed in the water. Yet beneath it all, there was something else. A rhythm, slow and deliberate, as though something large was pacing just beyond sight. At one point he thought he heard a whisper. Not words, not exactly, but the suggestion of them, carried by the wind across the reeds. The second day grew worse. The path narrowed until it was no more than boards laid across black water. Twice men slipped, and the swamp drank their curses with a hungry gurgle. Elias felt watched. He could not shake the sensation of eyes tracking them from behind curtains of moss. Once, when he turned suddenly, he glimpsed movement. A pale shape vanishing into the reeds. Too tall for an animal. Too silent for a man. By late afternoon, the guides halted. Before them, through the shifting haze, something took form. Low rooftops rising above the water, crooked chimneys leaking threads of smoke. A cluster of structures, neither village nor town, but something in between, sunken into the swamp like a nest. The guides refused to go further. "This is as far as we walk," one said flatly. "Past here, it ain't our world anymore." Elias stared at the settlement, his heart thudding with a mix of dread and fascination. The sheriff muttered a curse under his breath. The rest of the men shifted uneasily, gripping their rifles tighter. For weeks Elias had pieced together fragments in journals and bones. Now, at last, he stood at the threshold of the truth. The swamp had revealed its secret, and the secret was waiting. The village rose from the swamp like something half-forgotten, half-dreamed. Low houses leaned against one another, built from cypress planks and packed clay, their roofs sagging under the weight of moss and time. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys, carrying with it a heavy odor. Not the simple wood smoke of hearths, but something sharper, metallic, like iron scorched on stone. As Elias and the sheriff approached, figures emerged from the shadows of doorways. They did not rush forward, nor did they retreat. They simply watched. Their eyes caught the lantern light with an unsettling steadiness. Children clung to posts silent, their gazes too intent for their age. Men stood with broad shoulders and heavy arms, faces carved with lines that seemed more inherited than earned. Women, aprons stained with dark patches, gripped knives at their sides as though it were as natural as holding a spoon. Elias tried to steady his breath. At first glance these were ordinary people, weathered by swamp life. Yet the longer he looked, the less ordinary they seemed. Their features carried echoes of one another. Jaws too square, foreheads too wide, a sameness that whispered of bloodlines too closely kept. The children especially unnerved him. Their expressions were neither shy nor curious, but watchful, as though they had been taught to measure strangers the way one measures prey. From the largest house in the center of the village, a woman stepped forward. She was tall, with iron-gray hair pulled tight, and she carried herself with the assurance of someone accustomed to command. Her eyes were sharp, but not hostile, more like a judge appraising a petitioner. She wore no jewelry, only a dark dress stiff with age and use. The sheriff whispered her name, Maud LeClaire. "Visitors," she said at last, her voice carrying through the damp air. "Few come this far without a reason." The sheriff cleared his throat. "We're here under the law, ma'am. There've been disappearances, remains. We need answers." Maud's gaze flicked briefly to Elias, then back to the sheriff. "The swamp takes what it will," she replied calmly. "It always has. You city men, you think you can tame it, put fences round it. But it feeds as it pleases." Her words were smooth, but Elias felt the undercurrent. This was no denial, nor was it confession. It was something else, a doctrine spoken with the weight of belief. The villagers did not move, did not interrupt. They stood behind her in quiet formation, like an unspoken wall. Children still stared. Men's hands rested too easily on tools that could double as weapons. Women's knives glinted in the lamplight. Elias scribbled in his notebook, though his hand shook. He noted the odor in the air, the strange calm of the villagers, the absence of fear. In towns, guilt bred unease. Here there was no unease at all, only a patience, as though they had been waiting for this meeting long before he was born. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "We'll need to look around," he said, his voice more fragile than he intended. Maud inclined her head, just slightly, as though granting permission not because she had to, but because she chose to. "Then look," she said. "See what the swamp has made of us." And with that, she turned and walked back toward the great house. The villagers parted silently to let her pass, then closed again like reeds after a boat. Elias realized, with a cold weight in his chest, that they had not walked into a village at all. They had walked into a ritual. The sheriff's men moved cautiously through the narrow lanes of the settlement, rifles at the ready. Elias followed close behind, his notebook clutched in his damp hand. The villagers did not interfere. They simply watched, their silence as oppressive as the fog. The first outbuilding they forced open looked ordinary at a glance, a shed of warped boards and rusted hinges. But inside, the lamplight revealed rows of tools hung neatly along the walls. Knives of every size, their blades honed to a thin gleam. Saws, cleavers, hooks suspended from iron rings. None were neglected. Each edge was polished, each handle worn smooth by constant use. Elias stepped forward and touched one of the knives. The steel was cold, almost slick. His training told him these were no crude instruments. They were maintained with the care of a surgeon's scalpel. And their arrangement was not random. Each tool had its place, lined up with a precision that spoke of ritual as much as necessity. Then came the smell. Not rot. Not the gagging stench of decay he had expected, but something far worse. Smoke, salt, and iron. The smell of flesh preserved, prepared, made to last. The next building confirmed it. Inside were shelves, stacked high with burlap sacks and wax-sealed jars. Lantern light revealed their contents in flashes. Pale strips of meat, cured and bundled. Some were labeled with crude marks, symbols, initials, even dates. Elias's pen scraped across the page, his notes a jumble. Not for survival, but for storage. Not a kill, but a harvest. In the far corner stood something more chilling than food. A trunk, its lid propped open. Inside lay objects, each placed carefully, almost reverently. A row of small shoes, scuffed and waterlogged. Porcelain dolls, their eyes cracked but polished clean. A man's cufflink, still gleaming faintly in the lamplight. A woman's locket, its chain tangled with hair. It was not waste, not debris. It was a collection. The sheriff swore under his breath, his voice breaking the stillness. Christ above! Elias forced himself to keep writing, though his vision blurred. The evidence was undeniable. This was no act of desperation, no wild hunger. It was order, method, industry. Every object catalogued, every cut deliberate. In the largest shed, they found what looked almost like a kitchen. A long table scarred with grooves from years of blades. Hooks overhead, stained dark. Jars filled with grease and salt. On the wall, a slate covered in chalk marks. Tallies, names, numbers. The handwriting neat, practiced. Elias ran his fingers over the slate. The marks were fresh. Someone had stood here only days ago, recording, counting. His stomach lurched. "This isn't madness," he whispered. "It's work. Organized work." The sheriff's face was gray. "God help us," he said. Outside, the villagers still waited, silent, unmoving. Children peered around doorframes, their eyes wide but calm. Elias realized, with a shiver, that they did not see horror in these rooms. For them, it was normal, routine. A way of life passed from parent to child as naturally as sowing fields or mending nets. And as Elias closed his notebook, he felt a cold certainty seep into his bones. They had not stumbled upon a crime scene. They had stepped into a factory. The deeper they searched, the more the settlement revealed its terrible order. In a back room of the largest house, Elias found what he would later call the most damning evidence of all. It was a library, though not in the sense of polished shelves and gilt spines. Here, stacks of ledgers and hand-stitched journals crowded crooked tables. The air smelled of paper, tallow, and smoke. Dust clung to the covers, but when Elias opened one, the ink inside was sharp and fresh. These were not relics. They were records in active use. The first book he read was written in a precise, almost elegant hand. Its pages listed dates, tallies, and notes. The language was coldly domestic. Loin salted, ribs smoked, wastage none. Each entry was signed with initials. Elias felt bile rise in his throat. It was an accountant's book, but the commodity was human flesh. Other volumes were older, their pages yellowed and edges frayed. One, bound in leather cracked with age, bore the name Jean-Bastien Leclerc. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. Elias read aloud, his voice faltering. "The flood took the crops. The children were dying. I did what must be done. I cut and fed, and they lived. God forgive me, I saw his mercy in it." The early entries had the ring of confession, of horror cloaked in necessity. But as the years passed, the tone shifted. From pleading to instructive, from shame to doctrine. The journals became manuals, teaching the next generation how to prepare, how to preserve, how to conceal. Hunger had been the seed. Tradition became the tree. Elias turned another page. Recipes were laid out with the clarity of cookbooks. For tenderness, soak in brine. Smoke 2 nights for longer storage. Margins carried notes on flavor, on which cuts belonged to which age. A horrifying parody of household wisdom. One ledger described roles within the family. Hunters, processors, traders. Each name recorded under a heading, each duty passed like inheritance. Children's names appeared beside tasks. Gather salt, watch the smoke, collect the tokens. Elias felt his hands tremble. This was not the chaos of madness. It was civilization inverted, perfected around a single, obscene purpose. The sheriff stared at the open books, his jaw tight. "They've been at this for generations," he muttered. "Yes," Elias said hoarsely. "And they believe it righteous." In the corner stood a trunk of smaller notebooks, each belonging to different members of the clan. Some carried prayers twisted into justifications. "The Lord provides. We only take what he places in our path." Others were filled with symbols, marks Elias did not recognize. Perhaps a secret script passed within the family. Most chilling of all was a single sheet, pinned above the table with a crude nail. The handwriting was steady, recent. "We endure because we consume. The swamp gives us strangers and we make them kin. To waste is sin. To keep is faith." Elias closed the journal, his fingers slick with sweat. He realized, with sick certainty, that they were not standing in a village at all. They were standing in a church. And the gospel of this church was hunger. By the time the ledgers were gathered and the notebooks stacked, the air in the settlement had shifted. Outside, the villagers no longer lingered passively. They stood in clusters, eyes fixed on the sheriff's men. Children pressed together in silence, their faces pale and unreadable. The swamp itself seemed to tighten, fog wrapping around the houses like a curtain. The sheriff cleared his throat, his voice louder than it needed to be. "By the authority of the law, you're under arrest. All of you, you'll answer for this." For a moment there was no reaction. Then Maud LeClaire stepped forward. Her hands were empty, but her presence filled the space like a storm. She looked first at the sheriff, then at Elias, and finally at the books clutched in his trembling arms. "You come into our home," she said evenly, "and you call it crime. But tell me, lawman, when your children cry from hunger, what do you give them? When the land gives nothing, what will you place in their mouths?" Her words sliced through the fog like a blade. The villagers stirred, a low murmur rising. Some clutched knives, others hefted tools. Elias felt his throat close. He could not look away from her eyes. Eyes that did not plead, did not rage, but judged. "This is survival," Maud continued. "This is the covenant we keep. You feed your kind with crops and cattle. We feed ours with what the swamp delivers. And you think us monsters?" She spread her hands wide. "Then look to your own kind, for you raise beasts and call it mercy." The sheriff raised his rifle. "Enough! Lay down your arms." It was the spark. A shout broke the stillness, and then the air erupted. Villagers surged forward, knives flashing, axes raised. Gunfire split the fog, deafening, blinding. Elias stumbled back as one of the sheriff's men fell screaming, his blood soaking the boards. Children wailed, not in fear, but in a keening chant that seemed to urge their elders on. The fight was chaos. Lanterns shattered, flames licking at damp wood. Men grappled in the mud, blades clashing, boots sinking. Elias saw Maud still standing in the doorway of her house, calm amid the frenzy, her hands lifted as though she were conducting the storm. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay twisted in the muck. Several of the sheriff's men were dead. Dozens of villagers sprawled across the ground, their blood dark in the fog. And yet Elias could not shake the sense that it was not victory. It was massacre. The sheriff's chest heaved, his rifle barrel smoking. "Bind the rest," he barked. His voice cracked, raw. "We'll drag them to town. Let the court see." Elias bent to close a journal that had fallen in the mud. His fingers brushed the damp ink of a final line, written in Maud's hand. "We endure. We endure because we must." When he looked up, Maud was on her knees, bound, her face streaked with blood and soot. She did not cry, did not beg. She simply stared at him, her lips curling into something between a smile and a warning. "You can kill us," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "But hunger cannot die." Elias shuddered. He believed her. The trial that followed was meant to close the wound. In the courthouse, under the high ceilings and dim chandeliers, the remaining LeClairs were marched in chains before a crowd that filled every bench. The townspeople whispered, crossing themselves, unable to look away. The sheriff testified, his words clipped and stern. Elias was called as well, his notebooks placed before the judges like sacred evidence. But the official record was careful. The word cannibalism was spoken only in hushed tones, and soon struck from the proceedings. Instead, the charges were dressed in legal cloth. Murder, unlawful slaughter, trafficking in forbidden goods. The authorities feared the truth more than the crime. They feared panic, contagion, the idea that hunger could become doctrine. Verdicts came swiftly. Some of the men were sentenced to hang. Others, including Maud, were given life behind stone walls. As the sentence was read, Maud did not flinch. She stood straight, her iron-gray hair like a crown, her eyes locked on Elias. He wrote in his journal that he had never seen a prisoner less defeated. She looked not condemned, but eternal. The children were separated from their kin and sent to institutions. Officials spoke of rehabilitation and fresh starts. Yet within those walls, strangeness persisted. Some of the children refused food for days, their eyes fixed on the corners of the room as if watching shadows only they could see. One girl, perhaps no older than 10, was discovered writing in a stolen notebook. Her words were chilling. "The swamp gives and we take. To waste is sin." Years passed, but the echoes did not fade. Disappearances continued, though never in numbers large enough to rouse national notice. A trapper lost near Pinewood in 1904. A farmhand gone in 1912. In each case, the evidence was thin. A torn sleeve, a boot abandoned in the reeds. Yet the pattern traced the same circle Elias had once drawn. In 1937, a butcher in a nearby town was arrested after bones were discovered beneath his floorboards. When questioned, he confessed to practices he called the cure, claiming he had been taught by an old woman from the swamp. No name was given, but the sheriff who recorded his words underlined them twice in the file. Elias, by then an old man, followed these stories from afar. His hair had thinned, his hands trembled, but he still kept the journals. In his final entry, written in a frail scrawl, he noted, "The family disperses, the blood scatters, but their creed survives. It is not place they protect, but hunger itself." The town tried to forget. Streets were paved, stores opened, and tourists eventually came to fish the broad rivers. Yet beneath the new layers of progress, the memory pulsed like a buried ember. Parents still warned their children not to wander too far. Hunters avoided certain tracts of land. And when someone vanished, as someone always did, the whispers returned. No verdict had silenced the swamp. The Leclercs had lost their homes, their ledgers, their matriarch. But their hunger had learned to walk. Decades passed. The marshlands changed. Roads were cut through the reeds, bridges spanned the black rivers, and farmland replaced patches of swamp. The settlement of clay and cypress rotted into the mud, its timbers swallowed by water and vines. To the eye of a tourist, nothing remained but silence. But the swamp does not forget. In town, people grew tired of the old stories. They laughed them off, turning them into ghost tales told at harvest festivals. The Leclercs, they would say, were just a clan of lunatics, cautionary tale. Yet the older generation still lowered their voices when the fog rolled in. They still told children not to wander past the second bend of the river. And when a stranger disappeared, the laughter stopped. Elias March died with his journals locked in a drawer. Some pages were sealed in the county archive, marked sensitive. Others vanished altogether, as if someone had removed them with care. Scholars later argued over whether his accounts were exaggerated, or whether he had fallen prey to superstition. But those who read his surviving notes knew better. The precision, the detail, the quiet horror of his handwriting. It was the testimony of a man who had seen too much. The sheriff died too, carrying secrets he never put to paper. His successors spoke little of the case, except in warnings disguised as jokes. Don't accept meat without asking what farm it came from. And yet the disappearances never fully stopped. A camper lost in the 1950s. A boy gone missing in 1971. His bicycle found rusting at the swamp's edge. A drifter in the 1980s, last seen buying supplies from a shopkeeper who swore the man said he was meeting family out by the old river road. Each case remained unsolved. Each case carried the same echo. Today, the swamp seems quiet. Tourists fish its waters, photographers capture the moss-draped cypress, and developers speak of resorts. But locals still warn, never stray too far when the fog is thick. For in the reeds, the air feels heavy, as though it remembers footsteps not your own. Sometimes, when the night is damp and the lanterns burn low, a traveler at a roadside diner might be offered something special on the menu. And sometimes, without asking, he takes a bite, savoring a flavor he cannot name. A flavor that makes him shiver, though he does not know why. Hunger, after all, does not die. It adapts. It survives in silence, in bloodlines scattered and hidden, in the faint rituals taught in whispers. The Leclercs are gone, but their creed lingers like fog over the delta. And if you stand at the water's edge long enough, listening, you may hear it too. A low breath, neither wind nor beast, carrying a message as old as the swamp itself. We endure. We endure because we must.